the Dialed In Angling podcast presented by OnX Fish, Fish USA, Ski-Doo, Runnings, Minnesota DNR Ice Safety, Strike Master Augers, and 13 Fishing, L&M Fleet Supply, and DeWalt. Well, this week I am sitting at the Aiken Area Fisheries Office. I'm sitting with Beth Holbrook and Greg Berg, Mille Lacs Area Supervisor. We're going to talk everything perch. You know, as a perch angler, as an ice angler, when we get into this time of year, I know my mindset shifts towards perch. I know if you listen to the Dialed In Angling podcast, a lot of our contributors, as far as guides, they're talking about the perch populations and what they're catching for perch this time of year. As the walleye season is starting to wind down and the bite slows down, a lot of people's mindset shifts towards panfish and perch. And perch are one of my favorite species to chase. But I always say perch are the species that I love to hate because they're notorious roamers. They feed on all sorts of different things, from bugs to bait to crustaceans. They're always on the move. They're a prey species. But when you find them, it's super rewarding. It's one of the funnest times that you can have on the ice is catching jumbo perch. I know I look back to when I was a kid, and I have fond memories of going to lakes like Lake Winnebagosh, Mille Lacs, Leech Lake, going out, catching perch with my dad, drilling holes, and it was fun. We always, a lot of our family fish fries were surrounded around catching perch in the winter, and it was just one of those species that was fun, attainable. I remember going up to Winnebagosh and like throwing the jacket over my head and looking down the hole in like 10 feet of water and seeing thousands of perch, using underwater camera use on Dialed In Angling. We talk about a lot about using underwater cameras. Perch are one of those species that it's super fun to use an underwater camera. You learn a lot as an angler. But I wanted to corner these two, both Beth and Greg. Welcome to the podcast. I wanted to corner you guys because I have a lot of questions about perch, whether it's growth rates, what they feed on, what the DNR is doing or looking into as far as studies on perch, because I think a lot of anglers are like me. They're very curious about perch in general. And I always feel like as an angler, the more I know about a species, the better I am as an angler, as far as going out catching these things, whether it's on a small lake, a big lake. So let's get into it. Beth, let's start with you. Can you introduce yourself and what you do for the DNR and what you're doing with perch?
Sure. Thanks, Tony. My name is Beth Holbrook. I'm a fisheries research scientist for the Minnesota DNR. I work out of the Brainerd office, and I work on several different projects, but one of the big projects we've done in the last, we started in 2019 to about 2021 is we looked at perch populations in 28 lakes across the state. So when it comes to your non-large lakes, that project gave us a lot of information about perch that we didn't have. So
what, in doing this study, it's an ongoing study, you said, since 2019?
We've wrapped it up in 2021. We finished the field work, and we're just finishing up the final reports and everything right now.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Is there anything that stands out right now? I know that you're still working on the data, but are there some things that stand out where you're like, wow, I didn't know that was a thing, or, just something to do with perch populations where you're like, wow, that we didn't know that going into this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think some big things we found out were perch, the females grow faster and live longer than males. We found out that in most non-large lakes, perch mature really young and really small. And we think that the perch size structure is changing in lakes across the state. So it's getting smaller over time. Okay.
Do you know, like we were talking a little bit off air about, maturity of perch, the females mature at a certain size length. Do you think, I'm just curious as far as, recruitment or whatever, when it comes to perch, if you're seeing perch that are 4 inches long or 5 inches long, for example, that are producing eggs and they're reproducing and they're spawning at that age, is that creating sort of the air quotes stunted perch populations? Do you think that's the root cause of it, or do you think it's just always been like that in certain fisheries?
Well, I think the data that we have now suggests that populations have changed over time. So, and we have a couple ideas why we think that might be. But the reason we actually started this project was because we use standard survey gill nets in a lot of our lakes across the state to monitor populations. Your users are probably familiar with Lake Finder, for example, if you have a lake you want to look up. So that data is a lot of our standard survey data. And we found that catch rates of perch have declined over time. And so we started this project to try and understand a little better about perch populations and how they're changing and why they might be changing. But one of the things with our standard survey gill nets is we only catch perch 5 inches and bigger. So with this project, we really targeted the entire population. So we captured perch all the way down to 50 millimeters, which I don't know, 2 inches.
Sure.
So we were getting everything from their very first summer of life, all the way up. So that was sort of unique because we knew that the catch rates of big perch have declined, but with the study, we could actually find out more information about maturity and, when they mature and growth rates. And that was really eye-opening because we found that there's populations where, like the numbers in the standard gill nets had declined, where the managers were a little concerned. Maybe perch are disappearing in these lakes, and these are really important forage. We know everything loves to eat perch, right? Like that's why so many fish lures look like perch.
Right.
But then when we went out there with some of our other gears that we were using to catch those smaller fish, we found that there were still really abundant perch populations. It's just that they were maturing so small, they were never getting to the size that we sample in our standard gill nets.
Do you think there's a reasoning for that? Or, a hypothesis? You don't have to...
Yeah. Well, right. I think we're still trying to figure out all the reasons why. But one of the things that sort of popped out at us is that maturity seems to be correlated with temperature. So, for example, our southern lakes, fish mature earlier. So in those lakes, females are laying eggs for the first time at about age 2, and males spawn for the first time about age 1. And then as the farther north you go, then you might see maturity a year or 2 later.
So you literally have perch that are spawning at year 1?
Yes. And that was actually really surprising too, because most of our populations in these smaller lakes, males were maturing. That was the average age of maturity, was like they were already mature at the end of their very first, like they were maturing at the end of the first summer, and then they would spawn for the first time at age 1.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, it was really crazy. But what was even more surprising than that is we found in a few lakes that females were actually starting to mature at the end of the first summer so that they would lay eggs for the first time at age 1. And that's just like unheard of in the fish world. Yeah. I mean, I think probably the very minimum that we typically see with females is age 2 spawners. So that suggests that those populations have really high mortality. They're just trying to spawn as early as possible.
And what do you think's causing this? Like, do you say that they have high mortality rates as far as is it predation or what's going on?
Yeah, that's the part that's harder to sort of figure out, and we're still working on. So I do think there's a correlation with temperature. So, for example, populations that are warmer, they tend to spawn earlier, and they have they kind of live fast, die young type populations. I think a classic example of that is like Lake Pepin. There they grow pretty big. They grow really fast in Lake Pepin, but they just don't live very long at all. But in general, I mean, perch are relatively short-lived populations. Like I think on average, maybe 5, 6 is about what we see. We did have a couple of populations in the far north we had a 17-year-old perch, which was really remarkable. Wow. It was like the oldest perch that we've ever seen in Minnesota. But
because that's what I've always been told, like, perch don't live that long. They're prolific spawners. You have these boom and bust years. I've seen it over the years, whether it's on Mille Lacs, Leech, Winnie. You're seeing it out in the Dakotas right now, right? Devil's Lake's talking about stocking perch. And, I've talked to a lot of the guides extensively. A lot of them do, give some reports. I was just out in Devil's Lake pike fishing last week. And just talking to a few of the guides, they were saying, well, we had these big year classes of perch that kind of just grew up and died. They after 5 or 6 years, they were here and gone. And we just didn't have good spawning and recruitment. It's just interesting to listen to you talk about how like, some of these lakes, it's just like prolific spawning. They're spawning at 1 and 2. And then other lakes, it seems like we have these boom or bust cycles where they just sort of disappear. Can you speak to any of that?
Well, I think, in these populations, we're seeing really high mortality and really early maturity. They don't tend to live very long. So, I mean, like there might just only be a couple of year classes or 3-year classes that we're kind of see in the system. So I actually think, the populations where perch are kind of doing better, more robust, like they tend to live a little bit longer. They can wait to mature, until they're a little bit older. And those are maybe the population. And that's what we see more in the large lakes. So I think those populations, they grow fast. I think in Mille Lacs, Greg, you can tell me what the age of maturity, if I remember right, it's about 2.5 for females, maybe?
Yeah, it is right now, and that's changed a little bit over time. It used to be more like in the 3 range, but what we're seeing now is that a lot of our females are maturing around that 2 years old. But like you say, they are a species that grows really fast. They grow, especially down, like you say, in southern Minnesota, but they do grow really fast in Mille Lacs, especially now. We've seen some increases in growth recently, maybe due to just the population is a little bit lower now than it was 20 years ago, type of a thing. But there's generally a couple of 3 or 4 year classes, that kind of drive the fishery, sometimes even at 2, but like 3, 4, 5-year-old fish. We see a lot. There's a lot of those out there in Mille Lacs right now. Those are the bigger ones that anglers are catching. But after that, there's just not a whole lot of them out there. I think the largest or oldest fish, perch we've ever seen in Mille Lacs has been about 12 years old. You compare that to like some of the other top predators like walleye, we'll see them up to, the mid-20s and things like that. So yeah, they do move through the system pretty quickly.
You were talking about fish not living, I'm thinking 4, 5, 6 years is sort of a short time span, but you're talking like in some of these small lakes, these perch are only living 2, 3 years. Is that where you're?
Yeah, that's correct. So, and why that is, I would love to say we know the reasons why we don't right now.
Right. Yeah.
I think predation is part of it. I think that could be part of it. I think in some of these real, our lakes spanned all the way down to south of Hutchinson, all the way up to, north of Duluth. So I think in some of these south populations, they just, maybe it's high predation, harvest maybe. Most of our lakes, there wasn't a huge harvest component of the ones that we were looking at. So predation, or, it could be, there is a temperature effect where I think in those warmer systems, they just don't survive as long. So, and that's pretty typical of fish, actually. Like we see the longest lived fish tend to be farther north.
Yep, absolutely.
They grow slower, but they live longer. So eventually they kind of reach a larger maximum size.
I hope that's for all of us in northern Minnesota. That,
right. Yeah, hopefully.
We grow slower, but we live longer.
We're going to live longer.
Right.
I want to talk a little bit about, just forage in general. I know that you didn't do a lot of forage studies with this, but, me as an angler, I'm always identifying forage and what they're feeding on to base how I'm going to fish. Prime example, right now on Mille Lacs, out on the mud flats, it seems like a lot of these perch have bloodworms in their stomach. They have bugs. They're feeding on invertebrates out in the mud. You can see them kind of picking the silt on cameras. But then you get up to like a Cass Lake or Leech and you cut their stomachs open and they're full of rusty crayfish, right? Little tiny crayfish. They love eating crayfish. And I've always found that different times of year and different locations of perch, they'll have different types of forage in their stomach. I've seen it quite often where they have young of the year perch in their stomach. Like if you have this huge young of the year perch hatch, whether it's on Winnie or Leech or whatever, there'll be times where they're up on that sandgrass and they're just constantly feeding on wherever the yellow perch are most abundant in that young of the year class. I know perch are notorious roamers because I chase them from 30 feet of water to 3 feet of water all winter long. And they can be everywhere and they can be nowhere. I've gone back to the very next day in 3 feet of water where I absolutely smashed them and they were completely gone. They weren't, I found them over a mile from where I found them the day before. So that gives you an indicator of how rapidly these perch will come up on top of these flats and then dip down. When we get into February here, it seems like you really start to see a lot of that movement where they come from the basin. You'll get a bright sunny day. They'll be up on these flats, especially like Winnie and Leech and Cass. And then all of a sudden you get a cloudy overcast day and maybe the predators move in. I don't know what it is, but then they're right back out in that basin. Whereas Mille Lacs, they just roam the basin for the most part until they start to get into really late ice where they come in. But can you talk a little bit about, perch, what they're feeding on, what kind of where they live? I mean, I know that they live all over these systems and I've caught them absolutely everywhere. I just want to, talk a little bit through some of, the forage of the perch species. Because I always tell people I would way rather give someone a walleye spot than a perch spot because I could give you a perch spot and they're gone, right? And you could say I'm lying to you. Whereas the walleyes kind of relate to that structure. The perch can come and go.
I guess I can talk a little bit about that first, and maybe Beth can add some things if she has to. But I mean, and I think you hit a lot of it already. I mean, perch are just a very opportunistic feeders, I guess. They're omnivores. Like you said, they like to hang around, like the young of the year perch. So they're also known to cannibalize quite a bit. But yeah, they can, once they reach a certain size in their development where they can start feeding on, things like, the larvae, the mayfly larvae, the chironomid larvae, midges, you might know them at, and there's all kinds of different species of those, especially in Mille Lacs Lake. Once they can start feeding on those, when they get to that size, I mean, there's just, pretty much a limitless amount of that kind of food out there, and then they can, and that's one of the reasons why I think they're growing so well out there now is because the population is lower than it used to be. While numbers are good now, they used to be a lot higher, and there's just, pretty much a limitless amount of food out there for them. I know we get a lot of reports of them eating these bugs called isopods out there, from the mud flats and out in the deep areas, and when, I don't know, when they get a little full of bugs, they can always switch to little fish and stuff too. So I think why they're successful is that, they can just kind of make a living on everything that's there for them.
I always tell the story because on Mille Lacs, I always found this ironic, and I don't cut all the stomachs open of every fish, but sometimes Mille Lacs, you get their stomach that'll come up when especially from barotrauma or whatever out in that deep water. I caught this 14-inch perch. I mean, it was legitimately measured, 13 and 3/4, 14 inches. Yep. And it spit up a little walleye. This was years ago. We have obviously a year class of walleyes that this could happen. So I thought I would see it this year. But it actually spit up a little walleye, and I thought, man, this thing's been chased by walleyes its entire life, and now it's eating them. That gives you an indicator how big these perch get on Mille Lacs, Leech, Cass, Winnie, Devil's Lake. These 2-pound giants.
Yep.
And you know what? They're going to eat whatever's in front of them because perch, are notorious for absolutely gorging whatever they can.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those big perch are piscivorous, right? They love to eat other fish. One of the interesting things we found in the study is that the females, which tended to be larger, we found a higher proportion of those near shore when we used boat electrofishing, which we shock in the water and stun the fish, and we can scoop them up. Usually, it's only effective in like about 4 feet and shallower. And then we use these really small mesh forage nets, and we set those a little bit deeper. So those were usually in 10 feet to about 30 feet. And we saw sort of a separation. So there were more females, especially big females near shore, and there were more males, especially and smaller perch, sort of in those, like a little bit deeper in those nets. And I wonder if part of the reason why is just they're trying to avoid some of the predation by those bigger females, because I think probably... And that may also be why we actually see males grow a little bit slower, is they get kind of pushed off into a little bit, maybe less productive, a little bit deeper water, maybe partly to avoid being eaten.
Could be, for sure.
Sure. Well, let's take a quick break. I have a few more questions I want to ask you guys, everything related to perch. So stay tuned. We got more perch talk on Dialed In Angling when we come back from this. The cold months are rolling in, but that doesn't mean the adventure slows down. There's only one way to make the most of winter with the 2026 Ski-Doo lineup. Whether you're heading deep into your favorite fishing spots or carving your own path off the grid, Ski-Doo is built to take you there. And there's a reason Ski-Doo has been the best-selling snowmobile brand for more than 2 decades. Proven, reliable, world-class performance. Winter moves fast. If you want it, get it.
It's that time of year again, anglers. Winter is here, and L&M Fleet Supply is ready to make this your best season ever. Head into your favorite L&M Fleet Supply location across northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, or Michigan's UP, and browse the extensive collection of DeWalt tools and accessories, all guaranteed tough. Cut through the thickest ice with DeWalt's 20-volt drill. Brighten your setup with the assortment of 20-volt portable LED lights. And stay entertained with the DeWalt Bluetooth 20-volt speaker. It's weather-resistant, rugged, and ready for any adventure. Check out DeWalt's guaranteed tough deals and more at L&M Fleet Supply. Together, they're the perfect match for all your ice fishing needs.
Hey, Dialed In Angling fans. If you're looking for the greatest selection of ice fishing gear online, you're going to want to check out fishusa.com. They're America's tackle shop. They've got all the premier fishing brands under one roof. Check them out at fishusa.com. All right, we're back talking everything perch fishing. Off air, we should have been recording because we were talking about the cyclical nature of perch, not only as a species that we want to harvest as anglers, but also a forage species. Because, for me as an angler, I'm looking primarily for perch populations where I can go target them, where they're large enough as an angler to catch them. But I'm also concerned with perch populations as a forage species because I spend most of the year chasing walleyes, smallmouth bass, pike. A large part of their of all the predators in our systems, I'd say a large part of their diet has to be made up of yellow perch in most of our lakes in Minnesota. Am I correct, Beth?
Oh, absolutely. Anytime we do a diet study, pike, walleye, muskie, bass, everything loves to eat perch. So, and as a DNR, that's what we're primarily concerned, and we have a handful of lakes, mostly large lakes, where there's important sport fishery, but the rest of our lakes were really important. We're concerned about perch as a forage because they're our primary forage for our valued fisheries.
Yeah, that's definitely true, Beth. When I talk to anglers and the public about Mille Lacs Lake, I always say when our perch are healthy, everything's healthy. And in Mille Lacs, it's a large lake, and they're very important as a forage too. They kind of run the system, but when they're abundant, there's enough of them that kind of sneak through the predation gauntlet, I guess, and create sometimes a really great sport fishery. So yeah, super important.
Yeah, I mean, Mille Lacs for years, it seemed like, at least over the last decade, we've been in this real bust cycle of perch recruitment. And for me as an angler, that was always concerning. Sitting with the MILFAC group and talking to the DNR, the lower food web of Mille Lacs is what concerned me more than anything else, because it seemed like I could go to Leech, Winnie, Gull Lake, Pelican, anywhere around Brainerd, Aiken, you name it, across Minnesota, like you talked about, Beth, and see just giant schools of perch everywhere you went. And you go to Mille Lacs and it seemed like a desert. You'd barely see any perch unless you were in the southern bays or around some of the weed lines. It was like, where are the perch? And then that next year, I'd wait for that big young of the year perch hatch, waiting for another perch hatch. And it seemed like we were in this cycle for a long period of time. Now, we've had a couple good perch hatches. Now, this year is one of those years in 2005 where there was little or no recruitment. Can you guys speak to some of that cyclical nature? I know, Greg, you've seen it firsthand with big lakes that you've worked on in the past, but then, of course, now it being the area supervisor at Mille Lacs, you're seeing it.
Yeah, we have pretty substantial netting data and harvest data going back into like the mid 80s, and when you look at the numbers, you can definitely see there's like 4 different kinds of periods. There were a real high harvest period in the 80s, and then it kind of dropped down a little bit in the early 90s, and then it went up again, and then it kind of dropped down. So you can definitely see that over time. And then you also talked about poor perch recruitment for a while, and we've seen that exact same thing with the walleye, and that's pretty much the same timing as all the invasive species came into the lake: the zebra mussels, the spiny water fleas, cleaning up the water, getting rid of all the algae, and kind of disrupting that lower trophic level. I think for those younger fish, I think that was especially important for their survival. But now we're seeing an uptick a little bit. Both in the perch numbers. We finally got a good walleye year class, and there's several pretty healthy year classes out there now. So, hopefully we're kind of hopefully the lake's kind of settling itself back out again, I guess, if you will, and we can kind of get a little bit more into a more routine there. But and I think we've talked about this before, but 2024 was such a banner year for fish production in Mille Lacs Lake, for walleye, for yellow perch, for tulipy. And, they were like record years for all those species. But they probably used up a lot of those resources that the younger fish use. And so in 2025, we didn't see much of a hatch for any of those species, but that's actually kind of to be expected. And we've seen that all over the state in various cases. So yeah, hopefully we can get a little more consistent production there.
Do you think it has to do with environmental reasons why? Let's say 2025 wasn't very good, but 2024 was great. I know we talked a little bit off air about Cisco's, and, you sort of touched on it, Beth, with Cisco populations, when we're talking forage in general, I think a lot along the lines of perch and Mille Lacs or Cisco's on Mille Lacs, just like Cisco's on Winnebagosh and perch on Winnebagosh, same with Leech Lake. Like, do you think, there were some environmental reasons or temperature or whatever that these fish had a really good year across the board, all of Minnesota?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk more actually about Cisco or tulipy in that regard than I probably can perch. Greg, you could probably talk more about whether some of the other large lakes also saw a big perch year class in 2024. But I know for Cisco, it was actually a big year class, and just about all the lakes that we monitor for Cisco, we saw a big year class. And I think it was really because Cisco or tulipy as those fall spawners, it was an early ice off year, and I think they hatched right away. And then it was just this long, cold, windy spring. So I think they probably kind of had the lake, or especially sort of those feeding grounds, to themselves for a little while after they hatched. And maybe that's why they pulled off a good year class. But we saw that kind of in multiple lakes and multiple areas across the state. And I don't know as much with perch, Greg.
Well, with the perch and the walleye, it wasn't quite as widespread across a lot of lakes. I mean, it was a spring where we did, have a fair amount of like precipitation and things like that. So there was maybe some more nutrients in the lake that kicked up the plankton booms or something. But I know, I think it was kind of specific to Mille Lacs Lake, where probably biological conditions in the lake, were just right for them. And it wasn't so much, it was just a little more sporadic in some other large lakes around, because I know I've talked to a few of their biologists, and I was telling them, oh, we had this huge year class. Did you guys too? And they're like, no, we didn't get anything this year. So I think it was kind of specific environmental conditions in that regard.
But yeah, I think it can be both environmental and biological too.
Yeah.
I mean, we were talking that typically if you see a big year class of perch come through, we saw this with our study too, where we did some lakes where we had back-to-back sampling. And if there's a big year class, then there's kind of the next one was typically not really much to talk about. Yeah, there's a few fish there, but not really much to write home about.
It's weird how things are like that though, because you see that a lot with walleyes. You see that with other species where you'll have this giant year class and then nothing the next year.
Yeah, and then just to talk a little bit more about the 2024 year class. So they didn't get a whole lot of, it's a giant year class, and it's a year class that's spread out a lot in size. So that some of those fish, they were so big, there basically wasn't enough food so they could all grow as good as they normally do. So we're hoping that we can get another good year class of perch, or at least an average one, to kind of start help feeding those fish, because some of them are a little on the small side. They're really hungry right now. So hopefully we get a little bit better hatch this spring.
I hope so. I think, anytime you can have sort of back-to-back or within relative back-to-back year classes of good perch spawning, that also bodes well for those bigger perch to make it and kind of hit that threshold. I know I've been told in the past, like if a perch hits, I think it's 6 or 7 inches, I forget the percentage of their the increase that they'll survive to be a jumbo perch is X, whatever. I'm sure there's an equation for it, but it always seems to me like if you have a ton of those perch that kind of like in Mille Lacs right now, it seems like we have a pretty good year class of these 5, 6, 7 inchers in addition to the bigger ones, that if you get this next year class of young of the year perch just to boom again, those 5, 6, 7 inchers will make it, and they kind of grow and they get another year, or maybe they get a little reprieve from all the other mouths that are out there as far as the amount of walleyes. I know like up on Lake Winnebagosh, for example, it seems like, you'll have these 5, 6, 7 inch perch. And if there's no good recruitment of these young of the year perch, all of a sudden they start to disappear. You go to that next summer or next winter and they sort of start disappearing on you. And, I see that with Cisco's, with all sorts of different bait. Speaking of Cisco's or Tullabies too, I find it interesting because I was just on Leech Lake perch fishing in like 8 feet of water and I'm catching Cisco's. Whereas I'm used to catching them on Mille Lacs or, some other lakes extremely deep. But I know, like, just from being on Leech and Winnebagosh throughout the winter, I catch them shallow where I just don't see that on Mille Lacs Lake. And I don't know if it's a forage thing or what, but like you can go out on Mille Lacs and you can fish all over in the shallows, and it's very hard to find Cisco's in the winter right now, this time period. But yet you can go to Leech Lake or Winnie and they'll be up on these flats, and all of a sudden you'll get a big school of Cisco's that come through. And, it's cool to see them on forward-facing sonar in both settings and how they interact with baits and what they're feeding on the bottom. Going back to using underwater cameras, forward-facing sonar is sort of that underwater camera realm. I'd put it in the same sort of context of me as an angler learning a lot about what's going on down there, and watching Tullabies or Cisco's on underwater cameras is super cool. Just the way they feed and go and how they go about their business and how they come in as schools. And some of them are way up high in the water column. Some are feeding on the bottom, and they're just a cool creature. And then to see that interaction, like lake trout fishing in Canada, for example, or in northern Minnesota, and how the lake trout are literally following these schools of Cisco's, it's really, really cool to see.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
I find it intriguing along the same lines as forage that what an intricate part, Cisco's and Tullabies are, especially in northern Minnesota. Obviously, Mille Lacs is sort of the southern end of their range, but I know they are such an important forage species for the walleyes and pike and muskies as well.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, they're just such a super high calorie species too, for like to grow big fish. We like to have Cisco in the system.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, they're very important for growing those big predators.
Well, and it seems like, the reason I bring it up, it seems like Cisco's and perch, it sort of goes hand in hand. Wherever I find Cisco's in a system, it seems like I tend to find perch, especially throughout the winter months. I know that changes a lot in the summer, but this time of year, if we're talking February into March, it seems like where these Cisco's are is where the perch are at. And it always seems like if the Cisco's start to get more active, the perch are more active. And, it's just my observation as an angler, but it's cool to see. And now with forward-facing sonar, I get to see everything. I get to see those spectrum. There's times on Mille Lacs right now where I see schools of Cisco's, and then you can see the perch underneath them. And so it's pretty wild to watch that sort of interaction between the two species.
Yeah, they're probably providing overhead cover, right?
Yeah, right. Well, and it seems like also if you can get those Cisco's that come in and start chasing your bait, it's almost like I always tell people it's kind of like using a flasher like out on the Great Lakes, right? It draws those fish in. I saw it a lot when I was lake trout fishing this winter, where if you could get the Cisco's to come in and start chasing and interacting with your baits, it wasn't very long before the lake trout would come right in. And same thing, it's interesting with perch. If you can keep the Tullabies around, the perch come in, or the walleyes. I get it where I can drag Cisco's way up in the water column with my jig and sort of get them chasing either my swivel or my jig, especially a larger Tullabie. It draws in the perch or the walleye. So just a little life hack if anyone's going fishing and they got ciscos around and they're annoyed by them, that they're a good thing a good thing to have. And you're probably in the right area for jumbo perch. Let's talk a little bit more about perch stocking. The reason I bring it up to you guys, and I know that you're Minnesota DNR, not North Dakota DNR, but I was just out in Devil's Lake, and when we're talking perch, you can't talk perch without talking about Devil's Lake. It's just such a perch destination for everybody. But when I was out there, and I've seen it in the press as well, but I was talking to all the guides. I was talking to Zippy Dahl from Perch Patrol out there and all of his guys, and they were talking about the perch stocking that's taking place on Devil's Lake as we speak. And I found it interesting because, I've been told my whole life that perch are cyclical. They're prolific spawners. If you get a good year of class, it'll just make up for the rest. And they just sort of correct themselves. But, here we are, and they're stocking Devil's Lake. I know you can't speak, to what anyone's doing over in that state. I know that you're focused on Minnesota, but I would just like to get your take on it. Like what's going on over there. Do we do anything similar in Minnesota?
Nothing too similar, but like I tend to think in general, they're just kind of cyclical, and their populations will vary up and down, based on environmental conditions and things specific to that lake. But there is a little bit of perch stocking in Minnesota, actually kind of in our backyard here out at the Rice Lake National Wildlife Refuge. The Aiken Fisheries do a project out there for pike. And once in a while, we get a lot of perch too. And a lot of our smaller lakes around the area have kind of suppressed perch populations. They're very important for forage, for like in our stocked walleye lakes, some lakes that have nice northern pike populations. So every once in a while, we're able to get, a reasonable amount of perch that make it worth stocking. But that's usually in smaller systems. And I know it's helped a little bit to kind of help rebuild those populations. And in a couple of those lakes, it's actually offered some angling opportunities too. So like I said, that's kind of what I know about perch stocking in Minnesota. It's not too big, but it does happen a little bit. And, I don't know, it would probably take an incredible amount of resources, to get something going in a large lake again. But that's kind of my take on it.
Seems like it would be just a uphill battle to try to stock, to capture perch first of all, and then restock them in a lake like Mille Lacs or whatever. Because we've asked that in the past. I know just sitting on MilFac, people have asked about perch stocking on Mille Lacs, and the amount of resources that you would need to do that to even make a dent. I don't know that Minnesota has those resources. First of all, or where would you get all of these perch to make this happen?
Yeah, exactly.
We'd have to make room in the walleye hatcheries, right?
I think so. Yeah. So I don't know if that would be possible.
And I mean, to be honest, and I've seen this with multiple forage species, Cisco, saw it with the rainbow smelt population that we've been monitoring with perch. But I mean, it doesn't take very many, like even if you're on a downward cycle of the population, it doesn't take very many adult fish to pull off a huge year class.
Yeah,
if the conditions are right.
That's a good point. Yep.
Yeah, and I've seen it firsthand. I've seen it with Mille Lacs. I've seen it with Leech, Winnie. All of a sudden, you get these Gull Lake. You get these incredible perch hatches where, even prior to forward-facing sonar, just 2D sonar, you're driving around. It's just from top to bottom, just solid forage. And I've said it multiple times. Speaking in Devil's Lake, I just remember at Mille Lacs, we had a incredible perch hatch one year. It was like 2007, 2008. Don't quote me, but it was right in that time frame. And it was really tough to catch walleyes then because we had such a perch boom. And, I remember talking to Jason Mitchell about it because he came out here to film. And I said, yeah, the bite's gotten really tough this winter because we have so much bait. As I said, we have a bait fish problem. And he said, you know what? If you have that many bait fish, just never look at it as the problem. That's a really good thing for your lake, right? It's when you don't have bait that you have a problem. And that always stuck in my mind because, as a guide, it may have affected that winter, but then, looking back at it with how many years we had with almost little or no perch recruitment, I always thought about that statement that Jason told me. And he was right, and having those forage bases, I'm glad the Minnesota DNR is actually taking a look at perch populations and doing what you're doing, Beth. And even being over here at the Aiken Fisheries office here in the fall, when you guys were pulling your forage nets, to see all that with my own eyes is super cool.
Yep.
And, I appreciate the work you guys are doing. I appreciate you guys coming on the podcast and talking everything perch. I know as I get towards the end of February here, and as we get into March, my focus is going to be on perch fishing as a guide. I love perch fishing ever since I've been a little kid. Growing up on the lake river system I grew up on, that's most of what I caught in the winter were perch, and most of them are too small to keep. But as a little kid, you didn't care. Going up to Lake Winnebagosh, fishing with my dad, dropping a spoon down, catching perch with no graph, just kind of walking, going from hole to hole and catching perch. Love it. My kids have enjoyed perch fishing with the use of underwater cameras, just sight fishing down the hole. We have so many great perch fisheries in the state of Minnesota and in the Midwest in general that, as an ice angler, and some of that fishes year round, but a large part of my business in ice fishing relates to perch fishing. And if it isn't perch fishing, I'm always worried about forage populations like what you're doing, Beth. So I really appreciate it. Really appreciate you guys coming on. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to pause. And when we come back, we've got fishing reports sponsored by the Minnesota DNR Ice Safety. So stay tuned. We got some great reports for you this week.
There is nothing quite like Minnesota winter. Whether you want to try ice fishing, ice skating, or ice boating, make sure you know the risks and how to play safe on the ice. Measure ice thickness frequently and never go out alone. Always wear a life jacket or float coat and have ice picks readily accessible in case you fall through. Playing on the ice can be fun, but it's never 100% safe. Learn how you could play safe before you go out. Safety is always in season. A message from the Minnesota DNR.
OnX Fish is the best tool I have ever used for finding new lakes to target. Quickly filter lakes by species, then select trophy potential, high abundance, keeper potential, or high stocking effort to find the fish you're after in the size and the numbers you are trying to catch. Download from the App Store today to get research tools for the serious anglers and beginners alike, giving you the data to target the right lakes and the confidence to get there. Use tools like recent imagery, fishing hotspot data, or the best-in-class weather features that call out current wind, weather, barometer, moon phase, majors and minors, along with precip and more. OnX Fish is a phenomenal tool both on and off the water for discovering new fishing opportunities, many of which you'd never known existed. Download OnX Fish Midwest today, the app that is changing the game on ice and open water.
Runnings Home, Farm, and Outdoor stores are celebrating 78 years, serving 90 local communities across the Upper Midwest, the Northeast, and America's Heartland. Runnings has everything you and your family need for your home, on the farm, and in the outdoors. Lawn and garden, hardware, farm and ranch supplies, sporting goods, housewares, snacks, and everything for your pets. Go to runnings.com to find one of the 90 locations near you, or shop online anytime at runnings.com. Runnings, your home, farm, and outdoor store.
Hi, this is Josh Bullivant with Trappers Landing Lodge, out here checking some ice, going around doing a little bit of scouting. Here's your updated ice report and fishing report for Leech Lake. Currently, we are seeing over 30 inches of ice, so make sure you guys pack in your extensions. There are some cracks and ice heaves to be aware of, but for the most part, you can travel anywhere off-road around the lake. You just want to look ahead at those ice heaves and ice cracks. The walleye bite's been picking up this week, as it usually does with some of this warmer weather moving in. Seeing that bite in 14 to 18 feet of water. If you are and can be quiet, shallower is better for the walleye bite. We're seeing a lot of big fish, not really quantity, but good quality fish getting caught through the ice. Eel pout bite's been going strong as well. We've been seeing a lot of eel pout get caught per night. And then the perch bite seems to be picking up as well up in the shallows, 10 to 12 feet of water right now, right along the weed edges, weed lines, the gravel bars here on our end of the lake. So looks like some great warm weather coming at us this weekend and plenty of great ice conditions around the lake. So hopefully we'll see you guys up on Leech Lake.
Hey guys, Miles from MVP Guide Service checking in from southern Minnesota, the Mankato, Waterville, Faribault area. Fishing has picked up real nice after the last cold snap we had. I'm seeing 18 to 20 inches of ice, lots of wheelhouse and truck traffic. Ice conditions are fantastic. This time of year, I'm mainly focused on panfish, bluegills, and crappies. I'm targeting shallow weed flats, small little depressions, secondary basins, and shallow weed edges. I'm also looking for virgin ice. I don't want to see any holes. That just getting away from the crowd seems to really be the ticket to finding the concentrations of the panfish. Presentation-wise, I'm thinking pinheads, bright-colored pinheads, 16th ounce, tipped with a waxy, or the clam half-ant tipped with a single waxy. And that's been the go-to all year.
Hello, this is Eric Crockey here with South Dakota Precision Angling. Up here in the Webster, South Dakota area, northeast South Dakota. Just kind of give you a quick update on the ice report as well as the fishing report. Ice conditions been great, 18 to 21 inches in most areas. Only areas of concern would be around the heaves, so just kind of be careful in those areas. Walleye fishing's been consistently good. Fishing a lot of the basin edges, using kind of some of the VMC Tingler spoons and the green UV, chrome, and gold, kind of been the hot colors, as well as pink squirrel. So, just kind of staying mobile, working the basin edges, kind of been the key to our success this year. And the perch have been doing pretty well, pretty good as well. Been a strong bite. You got to move a lot. Been using the new Maven auger, which kind of been crucial. The blades hold up really well. It's a drilling machine. Helps us stay on those mobile schools. It seems like when you move, they move. So you got to kind of keep moving to stay on them. But no, there's big schools out in the basins. Been catching them with the tungsten tubby jigs has kind of been the key there. Something light, small presentation, get down there and subtly catch them. So the gold, any kind of glow colors been great there. So if you do want to come up fish with us, we are located in Webster, South Dakota. We have guided snow bear trips as well as lodging, and you can give us a call here. My name's Eric Crockey. My number is 605-956-3474. 605-956-FISH. Thank you.
Derek Kerr here with Rapala Ice with a quick metro report. So fishing's been phenomenal. Ice has been phenomenal. I've been mostly chasing walleyes in that 10 to 15 foot range. Really throwing the hatchet spoon in that glow, slimy lime color. Really have fallen in love with that, especially in low light conditions. Just tipping it with a fathead minnow. And then during midday, I do love that Juicy Lucy combo. So most of my walleyes, again, have been pretty shallow. Not sure when they're going to start moving out, but it's been a pretty cool bite so far.
Greg Berg with TR Guide Service here in the Brainerd Lakes area. The walleye fishing is getting pretty good now that the cold stuff is done. The warmer weather's coming in for this weekend. Rental houses are pushed in a little bit shallower in that 20 to 24 foot of water range, using same perch colored jigs, moving them a little bit slower. Those golds, greens, and yellows have been working great, tipped with the middle head, same with smaller size shiners and rainbow chubs on the set lines. Pan fishing are moving really fast in the basins and the shallower weed flats and points. We've been seeing that if you just set up, jig, wait for them to come to you, go on those high travel areas, the edges of basins, weed points and flats have been working well, using smaller size spoons. Tungstens with plastics have been working well too. Bluegills, same deal with them. They're moving really fast on those basins and on those weed edges. So just set up, jig, wait for them to come to you, and you'll catch fish. This is Trig Roach. We'll see you in the next one.
All right, we're going to wrap this thing up. I appreciate all of the contributions that we get from our guides, our fishing reports. let's just wrap up this perch conversation because I truly appreciate you guys coming on. Beth, what, just in closing, are you guys finding as a result of your studies as a whole? I know it's hard to speak generally when you're talking about this large study with all these lakes from southern Minnesota to northern Minnesota, but like what sort of ammo is the DNR gaining from this, or what knowledge are you gaining from this?
Yeah, I'd say a couple things. First of all, I think generally what we found is even in lakes where our bigger perch might be kind of declining, that there's still lots of perch in the system. So in general, we're finding that there's, healthy perch populations in terms of lots of forage. I think where we've maybe found some concern is in terms of sort of this shifting size structure. So like our biggest perch, we're kind of seeing the size structure decline over time, sort of statewide. And of course, there's some variability with individual lakes and stuff. And we think that's associated with perch maturing earlier and smaller. And, I think that's kind of a general pattern that we're seeing. And something to monitor and just to be aware of, especially we want to be able to protect our perch fisheries, our lakes where they're an important sport fish. So it's something that's just on our radar now. We kind of understand a little bit more about what we think is happening, and we want to make sure that we can keep those sport fisheries healthy.
Absolutely. I would love to see more studies done on large lakes. I see it firsthand as an angler, the perch populations, how they come and go, how they have changed over the years, going from Lake Winnebagosh to Leech to Cass to Lake of the Woods, Mille Lacs, Vermilion, all of these lakes that have large perch. It would be interesting to see how those lakes have changed over the course of the last decade in general.
Yeah, and the large lakes are a really unique system. I mean, they're very important because they're a lot of our important sport fisheries as well. But we are actually seeing some differences that kind of buck the statewide trend in terms of size structure. So you mentioned, Cass, Leech, I think Lake of the Woods. Some of these lakes we're actually seeing increases in size structure or increasing growth. So they're definitely a little different system, and we think we have some reasons why that is. But that's kind of our next step, as we're hoping to do more of an in-depth look at the large lakes and to try to tease apart a little bit more why we're seeing some of these patterns in the non-large lakes, but then to try and dig into the large lakes a little more specifically.
Absolutely. Well, Greg, I know there's some regulation changes coming to the Mille Lacs perch populations. I know, there's a press release coming out today, and basically announcing, perch population, perch harvest changes from 10 to 5. Can you talk a little bit about that regulation and when it's going to take place?
Yeah, sure. So some of you may have seen the press release already, but for the second year in a row now, the state is rapidly approaching their allocation for perch for this fishing year. So to try to curb that and stay within our means, the limit will drop down to 5 here beginning on Monday at 12:01 and remain that way for the rest of the season, just to try to stay within our level that we agreed to with the tribes.
Sure. And that's February 9th, Monday. That's going to change from 10 to 5. I think last year, the whole perch phenomena caught a lot of people by surprise. A lot of anglers didn't even know they were in Mille Lacs. I knew that there were pretty good populations in Mille Lacs because I had caught them that summer, but I didn't realize how widespread they were. I had caught them, and really, because it's been a few years since I've really targeted perch in the fall on Mille Lacs, I used to always go out and do tons of walleye perch combo trips in the fall. It had been a few years. Well, last year, even as a guide, it sort of caught me by surprise until you get out there, stand over the top of them with the forward-facing sonar and just see how many schools are actually out there. I was really surprised. Well, I think the majority of the angling community didn't really get out there to start chasing them until the end of, January into February. Mm-hmm. Whereas this year, a lot of anglers right out of the gate, we've had a banner ice year, started targeting perch early. And I had kind of assumed that at some point, just looking at the last numbers, I'm on the Mille Fat Committee, and I saw some of the numbers and I could see the writing was going to be on the wall to not go over that allocation, that we would probably have to reduce the limit. So,
yep, that's right. And I do just want to add that there is a lot of research going on now about the Mille Lacs perch and about what the safe harvest level should be and things like that. Some really high level quantitative fisheries people are punching out the numbers and, evaluating things to see if that safe harvest level is in the right spot where it needs to be at. So there's still a lot of unknowns. We know a lot more about the walleye population, say, than the perch population, because we have all of the population estimates to ground our models and things like that. So we're still learning about, how we can better manage that safe harvest level.
Well, I appreciate you speaking, and appreciate you both being on the podcast, but speaking to that change. So look for it on Monday, the 9th. You'll see a 5-fish limit on Mille Lacs remaining the rest of the season. And thank you guys so much for being on talking perch. I know a lot of people are just as excited about perch populations as I am, whether it's forage related or as an angler. I know as we get into March here, there's going to be a lot of people that are focusing. Obviously, the walleye season's closed. Their minds are going to be towards panfish, and a lot of people are going to be perch fishing. So, okay, thanks for tuning in. Again, I'm Tony Roach. Until next week, this has been the Dialed In Angling Podcast.